Hey folks, it's Nate. Thanks for joining me at the art table again today. Longtime watchers know that I am big on comic books, and if you've seen my last handful of videos where I've done reviews and breakdowns of the art and story, you're aware that I can get very detailed in the way I look at them. But today, I want to take a look at a broader subject, namely that of AI art. There's been a lot of hand-wringing about artificial intelligence taking over art as a result of image generators like DALL-E and similar tools kind of taking the internet by storm over the last couple of months. As a writer and an artist, I thought it would be interesting to discuss some of the difficulties that AI presents when applied to this particular medium. Before we get too deep into the weeds, I spent about 10 minutes browsing various image sharing sites under the AI art hashtag and collected a dozen images for us to consider, just so we can get an idea of the level of technology that we currently have. Let's start with this image. This is a landscape, I suppose you could say, more of a cloudscape really. Very good use of color and contrast here, but it's not a very complicated image. We basically have clouds and an eclipsed sun in the background. Aesthetically, it's very pleasing, but it doesn't really do a whole lot. This image is similar, but it adds something to the foreground. It adds a human being and a little bit of actual landscape. Now, here we have an interesting image. We have several human figures and a number of machines on a landscape, all directed towards us, the viewer. At first glance, this looks like a more complicated image, but it's actually not. It's broken into the same three distinct planes as the other two, foreground, middle ground, and background, and while the objects depicted there appear more complex, if you compare them to the level of rendering on the clouds in the previous images, they're actually about the same. By the time we move on to this image, we begin to see the pattern. These images have a shadowed foreground, a distinct middle ground, and a blurry background, and they depict 2 to 3 objects in each of these planes, all just sort of layered on top of each other. The most telling detail is that the lighting on each of these planes is uniform. Nothing is emphasized with it, nothing is de-emphasized with it. Even in this image, which looks to be intended to evoke a sort of Lovecraftian dread, no use of lighting or disguising elements from the viewer's eye is used to increase the horror of the image. Usually these kinds of depictions will only show us a little bit of what is actually in the scene in order to trick our imagination into filling in the details. This kind of composition is something that is an intrinsic part of horror. If you've ever seen a documentary about the movie Jaws, you know one of the happy accidents in that was the difficulty with the shark prop forced Spielberg to keep the monster off screen for most of the film, which made it scarier. That kind of artistic decision is beyond the capability of an AI, at least so far. Now, this image is very interesting because clearly the AI has composited a number of things together in order to make the primary subject of this illustration. The central figure is wearing a suit that seems to be a bunch of old school science fiction suit tropes all kind of thrown into a single figure. The result is interesting, but it also defies logic and is not really a great design for a character in a story. If I was trying to get a character design from an AI, I would shoot for something more like this. While we are obviously not looking at a human being here, we are seeing a character with noticeable facial features suited to giving us expressions and acting on screen. While most of these pictures do seem to stress a certain degree of realism in their images, you can certainly get a number of textures and effects to create other kinds of images. Consider this oil painting composite, for example. And of course, we can get images that look more like traditional illustration as well. Consider this one. This is a pretty typical design for a character from a manga, particularly one set in the present day. Here is another character sketch. This one could even be the same character at a different stage in life and showing a slightly different expression. Here is a third character with a different face shape, different hair color, and again, a slightly different expression. And you may be seeing a through line developing here. We have a number of different characters and clothing styles, but not a wide variety of expressions. In fact, in my 10 minutes or so of browsing, the most expressive image that I did find was this picture of Ghost Rider, who has a very aggressive smile, I suppose you could say. Of course, he is a skull, so that is a given on his face, but you can also see that the eyes have been tweaked slightly to give him a sort of "what do you think" expression. So that is roughly the state of AI art. It can show us recognizable characters, and it can show us recognizable landscapes, but it can't really do anything very complicated with them. Now, if you've watched my video on AI and storytelling, which I will link down in the description below, you know that this is because AI do not understand framing. They don't understand how you take a situation and present it to the audience with an interpretation. An artificial intelligence is a prediction machine. If you say, "I want to see Ghost Rider," it will look at a bunch of images and make a prediction of what Ghost Rider looks like. But it will not understand what the mood Ghost Rider should be in is. It cannot frame Ghost Rider's situation as normal for the character or exotic for the character. By the same token, when an AI is building a landscape for you, it cannot put an emphasis anywhere on the landscape. It can only look at a bunch of landscapes and build its foreground, middle ground, and background based on what it sees in those landscapes. This makes artificial intelligence a very limited tool when you are building images, especially if you want those images to tell a story. A story in a comic book requires sequence to its illustrations. One image must be framed as coming after another. Now, admittedly, the user of the AI can do the framing for the AI. However, because a machine cannot understand the framing, wrestling with the machine to produce that framing is going to be much more difficult than just consulting with a living artist would be. Furthermore, machines do not understand cause and effect. Another very important thing when you are building a sequence of events into a story. You cannot tell the AI that it requires image A to be the cause of image B, because an AI just cannot understand that concept. Until these problems are solved, if they ever are solved, I suspect that attempting to produce comics with AI art is going to be more difficult than just trying to produce comics with a living human artist. And that's before we begin thinking about the issue of having your characters act on the page. All of the AI characters that we saw here were pretty expressionless because an AI doesn't understand emotion. How can they put emotion onto the face of a character? At best, the user will have to track down many photographs of faces that embody the emotion they want and feed them into the AI in order to create something like the image that they are hoping to get. And then they will have to rely on the AI not compositing the image in some way that is more uncanny and less evocative of an emotion. Now, I am not entirely against the use of AI in comic storytelling. It is just another tool, after all. And once you get a sense of what the tool is capable of, and you become experienced with it, you can use it just like any other tool. I think in the building of landscapes and environments in particular, AI shows a lot of promise. However, there is another hurdle to be considered as we look at the potential of AI art. It relates back to something I said earlier. I said you could feed a number of pictures with an expression on them into an AI in order to get the expression you want on the output. The problem then becomes, where are your source images coming from? And what does that mean for the state of art? Many of these AIs are drawing all of their stock images from the internet, from publicly available images owned by other people. Whether they're pulling off of Instagram, Twitter, or artist websites, a lot of noise has been made about the fact that AI images are all sourced from somewhere else. Now, on one level, who cares? There is a fair use right to most of the art available on the internet. You're not directly duplicating art in most cases, and the fact that it's been run through all of these filters and algorithms essentially transforms the art, giving you a fair use right to that art under most copyright law, at least as I understand it. I'm sure a lot of lawyers will get very rich hashing these issues out in court, but from the viewpoint of the layperson, this looks like a pretty acceptable use of art in most cases. There are some cases where AI art is just slapping a filter over a pre-existing image to give it a different look, perhaps turning a charcoal drawing into something that looks more like a colored painting. That is probably copyright infringement, but most uses of AI art are not that simple. If I take all the photographs in a Vogue magazine, cut them out, and turn them into a collage, that collage is then my intellectual property. It does not belong to Vogue anymore, and that's essentially what an AI does. No, the problem is going to be the algorithm. No matter how complex, all algorithms are ultimately mathematical formula that are predictable. Furthermore, since learning algorithms, like those that AI artists depend on, learn by studying other images, AI art is all very derivative. As I said earlier when we were looking at the AI images, there is only a couple of methods of composition in them, even though the subjects of each image is very different. That kind of cookie-cutter composition is ultimately not good for storytelling because it becomes boring very quickly. It doesn't lead the eye anywhere. There is nothing unique or special about any given composition. I fear that comics told through AI art will be dull, listless, and lifeless to the audience, and ultimately just add to the ocean of boring, uninteresting, and derivative storytelling that already floods the market. In other words, AI art is not going to kill comics, but it may keep it going down the road it's already on. But that's just my take on AI art. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. There's a like button and a subscribe button down there. You can use those as you see fit, and I'll talk to you later.